I was told there were 4 bodies inside the double-wide mobile home. But once we found out the extent of their injuries and the fact that their throats were cut, and then they were shot post-mortem, it seemed very, very aggressive and personal and somebody full of rage and hate. I've never seen anything like it before or since.
It's Halloween night in Pendleton, South Carolina, about 2 hours northwest of Columbia. The streets are alive with children dressed as ghosts, goblins, and monsters, all trying to scare up some fun. But just outside town, something far more sinister lurks. At the doorstep of Mike and Kathy Scott, the night is eerily quiet. A bowl of Halloween candy rests undisturbed on the porch. Inside, the home tells a very different story. In the bedroom, Kathy Scott's lifeless body lies in a pool of blood. In the living room, 3 more victims: her husband Mike, her mother Violet Taylor, and Mike's mother Barbara Scott. 4 members of one family had been executed in cold blood in a brutal, calculated act of violence that chills to the core. On November 2, 2015, a woman calls 911, reporting that she's found 4 bodies in a remote house just outside Pendleton. What seemed like a normal day would soon spiral into a nightmare for the small town.
Pendleton is an older town in South Carolina. It's been around for a long time. It's a small town. It probably would have been considered like a plantation town in, the 19th century. A lot of old money kind of town.
Staff Sergeant Scotty Hill, a detective with the Anderson County Sheriff's Office, was working that day when the call came in.
Pendleton is not somewhere that we have a lot of violent crime. And then this part of Pendleton is actually more of a rural area. It's not even part of the town of Pendleton. It's just somewhat busy as far as traffic because you can cut between major highways, but you don't have foot traffic, nothing like that. It's a few homes, not somewhere where you would see a lot of activity other than cars just driving through. I was working that day, and like all of us that was working that day, if you were a detective, you got called and told to respond to the scene. We didn't know if there was a killer or if the killer was inside the house. By the time I showed up, it was a pretty big scene. Detectives were arriving, forensics was arriving. There was people everywhere by the time I got there. There are 2 mobile homes on the residence. We identified them as the double wide and the single wide. It was at least a few acres, the property. 4 people lived in the double wide. Mike and Kathy Scott, they owned it. They were a married couple. And then each of their mothers lived with them. Violet Taylor, who was Kathy's mother, and then Barbara Scott, who was Mike's mother.
Pendleton isn't known for violent crime. It's quiet, rural, and isolated. But by the time Scotty arrived, the scene was chaotic. Law enforcement and forensics teams were already on the scene. The property had 2 trailers, a double-wide and a single-wide. Mike and Kathy Scott lived in the double-wide with their mothers, and now that home was a crime scene. Kathy's daughter Amy Velarde had just returned home from a weekend trip to Columbia. She found the unimaginable when she entered her mother's home: 4 of her loved ones dead. Mike, Violet, and Barbara lay lifeless in the living room. Kathy was found in the bedroom. The sight of so much blood would haunt Amy for the rest of her life.
So in the single wide lived Amy Velarde, who was Kathy's daughter, her husband Ross Velarde, and then their children. Amy Velarde is the one who called in the actual crime to the sheriff's office. She called 911 and basically said she went to her mother's and found her family deceased inside. Mike and Violet and Barbara were all found in the living room, and Kathy was found in the master bedroom, and obvious injuries lots of blood. Still, to this day, probably the bloodiest scene I've been to.
At first, Detective Hill thought the killings might be a classic murder-suicide. Kathy could have killed her family before ending her own life. But when they found Kathy's body, they realized there was no gun. And as the investigators examined the crime scene, they saw the horrifying details. The victims had their throats slashed and were shot after death. It wasn't a murder-suicide, it was an execution.
What really kind of ended that theory was kind of twofold. They first moved Kathy, and she didn't have a gun. So that really took the wind out of the sails that she shot everybody and then shot herself because there was no gun. And then, of course, when they got to Mike and Barbara and Violet and saw that their throats had been slashed, it was very clear at that point that we were dealing with someone who had murdered all four of these people, someone or possibly multiple people that had done this. They all died from stab or slash wounds. Mike, Barbara, and Violet were all killed by their throats being slashed, and Kathy was killed by a stab wound to the chest. Mike, Barbara, and Violet were all shot post-mortem. Kathy was shot while still alive, but that wasn't what killed her. It was the knife wound to the chest that killed her.
This wasn't just a killing, it was overkill. The victims were stabbed and then shot, one after another. There were no signs of forced entry, no obvious robbery. Mike was probably the first victim, caught by surprise. He had no defensive wounds, no sign of a struggle. The lack of forced entry suggested that Mike knew the person who killed him. Whoever did this had been invited into the house.
With Mike not having any kind of sign of defensive wounds or any sign of a fight, I definitely believe he was caught off guard. It seems like they were probably at least a couple of them in the living room watching TV. You know, it's hard to say with Kathy because she moved around during the attack. We know that she went from living room to the master bedroom. So I can't say if she came out of the master bedroom first into the living room, then retreated back into the master bedroom. So I'm not sure where she was, but it definitely appears Mike at least was in the living room watching TV. I think with there being no forced entry and Mike showing no signs of trying to fight back, it tells me that his guard was down, which leads me to believe he knew the person who was in his house.
A short time ago, the names of those who died in the home behind me were released. Family in disbelief over the tragedy that has fallen upon this close community.
I'm Pam Isbell. My mother was Barbara Scott, and I am the sister of Terry Michael Scott, two of the victims who were killed in the Pendleton quadruple homicide. The other two were my brother's wife and her mother. At the time of his death, Mike was 59 years old. He is my older brother. He worked for South Carolina Department of Transportations. He was on a road crew, so he was outside a lot, which was one of the things that he loved the most about having that particular job. I like to say that Mike got all of the good looks in the family. He was a very handsome man, tall, strong, dark hair, turning lovely shades of gray. He was a very hardworking man. He spent his life, much like our mother, trying to do good things for family, for friends, for neighbors. As we aged, we definitely became closer. He was always there for me. He was my biggest supporter. No matter what was going on in his life, he took time to be a part of my life. We talked pretty much every morning. That was the way that my morning always started, was a telephone call from him. I still find myself thinking it's about time for Mike to call.
Pam not only lost her beloved brother, but she also mourns the death of her mother, Barbara Scott, who was 80 when she was murdered. She was known to everyone, a wonderful cook, always doing things for others, especially her family. Barbara loved spending time with the babies, helping out in her community, and offering care whenever she could.
Everybody knew her. She was a wonderful, wonderful cook. She loved doing for other people. She loved her family. She did a lot of babysitting for people in her community. She really enjoyed being with the babies.
Kathy Scott, Mike's wife, was 60 when she was murdered. She and Mike had been high school sweethearts, but they married later in life and were inseparable ever since. Kathy's niece, Tammy White, was close to both her aunt and her grandmother, Violet Taylor. Tammy remembers Kathy as the kind of person who lit up a room. She was the life of any gathering, always making people laugh. Violet, on the other hand, was quiet, reserved, but incredibly kind. She kept to herself, but was always peaceful and loving, never speaking ill of anyone.
My Aunt Kathy was a people person. She worked in restaurants for most of her life as a waitress, so she liked to be around people. She liked to make people laugh. She liked to always laugh. Real bubbly. My grandmother was the sweetest woman that you would have ever met. She didn't say much. She was very shy and kept to herself a lot, but she was very caring. She was a very peaceful lady. I've never really ever heard her say anything bad about anybody.
Pam had spoken with her brother Mike on Halloween evening. Mike and Kathy had been looking forward to celebrating the holiday with their grandchildren the next day. But by Sunday, Pam hadn't heard from him. It wasn't unusual, so she called him Monday but left a message. By then, he was already gone. Pam found out about the tragedy when a cousin called her, saying, "I don't know how to tell you this, but the preacher is here, and there are 4 dead bodies at Mike's house."
She said, "I don't know how to tell you this. The preacher is there, and there are 4 dead bodies at Mike's house." And that's all I remember.
The exact time of the murders remains unclear, but investigators were able to narrow it down with help from Kathy's brother, Roger. On Sunday afternoons, Roger usually stopped by Mike and Kathy's home to check in. But on that Sunday, there was no answer at the door. Roger left without seeing anyone. Detective Hill believes that's because the murders had already taken place.
Our coroner's office ruled their death as being on November 1st. I believe they were killed Halloween night. Last activity we have on either bank accounts was at night. Mike and Kathy went out to dinner that night. There was still Halloween candy by the front door. I don't know if they were anticipating trick-or-treaters, but they had candy by the front door.
The coroner's office ruled the deaths to have occurred on November 1st, but Detective Hill suspects the killings took place on Halloween night. The last activity on Mike and Kathy's bank accounts was from that night. Halloween candy was still by the front door, a sign they were expecting trick-or-treaters. But instead, something far worse had already happened.
With there being 2 weapons used, it suggests that 2 people were involved. I won't say it's impossible for it to have been one person. I will say whoever used the knife was a very skilled person with a knife. This wasn't somebody who picked up a butcher knife and, out of anger. This is somebody who was at least trained on how to use a knife. The majority of people who worked this case's opinion is that there were 2 people involved, one with a knife, one with a gun. Again, we don't believe this was a kitchen knife or anything like that. So we believe the killer brought the knife with him or her, and they were led into the house, most likely. The family had to have known them because nobody put up a fight until after the attack occurred or started. So I definitely believe this was well thought out, well planned by the people who perpetrated it.
With the victims all being stabbed and shot, another theory started to emerge. 2 weapons were used, suggesting 2 people might have been involved. Detective Hill believes it's possible one person did everything, but the skill shown with the knife pointed towards someone trained in using such a weapon. The theory most investigators lean toward is that there were 2 killers, one with a knife, the other with a gun. It's likely the killers were let into the house. The family had to know them, as no one fought back until the attack was already underway. This crime wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act. It was carefully planned.
All 4 victims suffered violent deaths, not the kind of murders that you just happen to kill someone, or you break into a home and you're surprised by someone still being up or awake or whatever. These deaths were not like that. People from the sheriff's department described it as the worst scene that they had ever investigated.
Pam Isbell couldn't help but reflect on the violence of the deaths. All 4 victims suffered brutal, violent ends, not the kind of murders where the killer is surprised or something goes wrong. This was methodical, cold, and calculated. Deputies at the scene said it was one of the worst crime scenes they had ever investigated.
None of these people would have, as far as we have found, would have crossed anybody or done anything to someone who would want to hurt them. They didn't do drugs, they didn't drink excessively, they didn't gamble. There's absolutely nothing in their history to lead us to believe that someone would want to hurt them.
Mike, Kathy, and their elderly mothers lived a quiet life in rural South Carolina. At first glance, they didn't seem like the type of people who would be targeted for such a vicious crime. Detective Hill couldn't find anything in their history to suggest they had enemies. They didn't drink excessively, gamble, or do drugs. They led simple, peaceful lives. No one could understand why anyone would want to hurt them.
Mike was well known in the area for being the buyer and seller. If you needed some cash and you had something that you wanted to sell, a lot of people knew he was the person to call.
But there was one lead that intrigued detectives. In addition to his job with the Department of Transportation, Mike had a second job. It was a way for him to make extra money, and it might hold a key to understanding who could have been involved in this brutal attack.
When I was first questioned, I was asked if Mike would have had a lot of cash there at the house. And I told them that he would. They asked me how much. I'd say anywhere between $70,000, $80,000 in cash. And they told me then, oh, well, we did not find that amount of cash in Mike's house.
Mike Scott had been buying and selling various items, including jewelry and gold. He used to conduct some transactions from his home, but Kathy grew worried about safety and convinced him to stop. Despite that, Mike often had large sums of cash in the house due to the nature of his business. When Pam Isbell was first questioned by police, they asked if Mike would have had a lot of cash in the house. She confirmed that he did, estimating anywhere between $70,000 and $80,000. But when the police told her they hadn't found that amount of cash, it raised suspicion. This suggested that robbery could have been a motive. However, when police searched the bathroom, they found a small safe hidden behind the toilet, packed with cash. Could the killer or killers have missed this money?
I was the one who found the safe, and it was pretty well hidden. Like I said, we missed it the first night, so I don't think they knew it was there. And that's the only reason why they didn't take it. It was tucked in behind the toilet. It was one of those lucky moments where I'm in the bathroom kind of looking around, and it just kind of caught the, out of the side of my eye. I was like, what is that? And walked over, and it turned out to be $20,000.
The safe contained $20,000. It was one of those rare moments when Detective Hill found the safe while casually looking around. He'd missed it the first night, but it caught his eye later. There's no way to know how much money was in the house, other than what was found in the safe.
According to the family members, no one other than family knew that Mike kept a lot of money in his house.
Family members confirmed that only the family knew Mike kept large sums of cash at his home. In the course of their investigation, detectives obtained a search warrant for the home of Amy and Ross Villardi, who lived in the single-wide trailer. They made another surprising discovery.
We found a little over $65,000. I think it was $67,000, almost $68,000 in a safe in the master bedroom of the single wide. The amount of money we found in the single wide did raise some questions because we were told by various family members and confirmed through interviews that Amy and Ross, who lived in the single wide, were in financial trouble. Their cars were about to be repossessed. They were about to be kicked out of the building they rented for their business. So it was pretty surprising to find that amount of money when they were having financial issues.
While searching the Villardi home, police also found a stash of guns. This raised a new question. Could one of these guns have been the murder weapon?
Whenever we're on a scene like this and we know a gun's involved, if we see a gun, we're going to take the gun because we don't know if it's the murder weapon or not. We did take every gun we found in there. Ross Villardi claimed most of them, and he was a Marine, so it really didn't seem out of the ordinary for him to have a lot of guns. Being military and being here in the South, everybody has guns down here, and especially former military would have more than even the average person.
Whenever detectives are on a scene involving a gun, they take every weapon they find. Even if they're unsure whether a particular gun is the murder weapon, they collect it. Ross Villardi, being a former Marine, claimed ownership of most of the firearms found. In the South, it's common for people, especially veterans, to have a large number of guns.
I was surprised that a lot of cash was seized from Kathy's daughter's residence. I was also very surprised that one particular gun that was registered in Mike's name was taken from the other residence. And that really made me begin to wonder if this gun belonged at Mike's house. What other things were taken from there that I didn't know about.
What surprised Pam Isbell was the large amount of cash seized from Amy's house and the discovery of a gun registered in Mike's name at another residence. She began to wonder if there were other items from Mike's house that were taken, ones she didn't know about. Despite finding a significant amount of cash and several guns, no murder weapon was located in the Villardi home. Amy and Ross appeared shocked by the murders, with Amy even speaking to a news reporter about the tragedy.
I keep feeling like I should be waking up from a dream right now, and it's just not happening. So yeah, it's like a movie or something. It's not supposed to be real life.
Amy provided us with a few potential suspects, but we were able to rule them out pretty quickly through alibis and even in some cases phone records showing they weren't near the scene of the crime when it occurred. So Kathy's daughter Amy and her husband Ross were initially very cooperative with the case. Once the focus of the investigation turned toward them being potential suspects, they stopped cooperating altogether.
Amy suggested a few potential suspects, but investigators quickly ruled them out through alibis and phone records showing they weren't near the scene. At first, Amy and Ross cooperated fully with the investigation, but as the focus shifted toward them as potential suspects, they stopped cooperating. In addition to Amy and Ross, detectives turned their attention to other possible suspects, hoping to uncover new leads in the case.
We pursued a lot of suspects. There was a neighbor down the street that we initially looked at as being potential suspect. Him and Mike had a bit of a falling out over a deal. They didn't work out. He tried to sell Mike something. but Mike told him he wasn't interested in the item, and the neighbor got upset. We looked into him. He had nothing to suggest he would know how to use a knife in this way. He just did not fit with our theory of what the killer would look like. We could never put him on scene. His DNA was not inside the house, nothing like that. So we moved on from him. Todd Colehep is I'll use the word local-ish serial killer, operated in Spartanburg County, which is 2 counties over. So we know he did have dealings down here. And then more information started rolling in about how he had committed a quadruple homicide in the past. We kind of took a look at him.
Staff Sergeant Hill also explores the possibility that the killer didn't know Mike and Kathy and that the attack was random. He looks into other unsolved murders in the area for similar patterns, and one name stands out: a serial killer named Todd Colehep. But there is nothing to link Colehep to Pendleton or the Scott family, and the evidence for it being a random attack is slim.
Mike and Kathy were not flashy people. They didn't drive nice cars. They drove decent cars, but it's not like they were rolling around in Mercedes or anything like that. They didn't wear Rolexes, and, they were normal people, working class people. If you saw them out, you would never think that guy has thousands of dollars in cash in his house. And if you drove by this house, again, it's just a double-wide trailer in the middle of a place with 1,000 double-wide trailers. And that's if you even noticed it, and then this area is not somewhere where you get a lot of foot traffic either. So I believe it's highly unlikely someone was walking down the road. In fact, I would almost bet a paycheck on if somebody had been walking down the road, someone would have called law enforcement, because it would be that abnormal to see someone walking on that street.
Mike and Kathy weren't flashy people. They didn't drive expensive cars or wear high-end clothes. They were just normal, working-class people. If you saw them, you would never think they had thousands of dollars in cash at home. And their house, a simple double-wide trailer, blended in with the many others in the area. There's no way someone would have been walking down the road without drawing attention. This was a quiet, isolated area.
7 months, no arrests for the murder of Mike, Kathy, and Barbara Scott.
Today marks 1 year since 4 people were found dead.
It's now been 3 years since the 4 brutal murders of the Scott and Taylor families in Pendleton.
With few clues at the crime scene, the investigation quickly ran out of viable leads, threatening to grow cold. 7 months passed with no answers for the murders of Mike, Kathy, and Barbara Scott. Then 1 year, and then 3 years. Staff Sergeant Hill believes the circumstances of the quadruple homicide suggest this was a targeted, planned, and well-thought-out attack. Hill believes there are 2 possible motives: financial gain and hatred. The killer knew how to kill quickly with a knife. The plan was to get into the house when everyone's guard was down and eliminate the biggest threat first, Mike, the only man in the house. The crime was carefully executed, almost flawlessly. Pam Disbell believes the killer must have been someone who lacked any sense of right or wrong, someone selfish, possibly with a personal connection to the victims. It wasn't a random act of violence. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever was responsible had to be someone either welcomed in or someone who simply entered through an unlocked door, which would have been unusual. Tammy White, Kathy's niece, felt the killer was probably someone they knew. She noted that the house wasn't ransacked and nothing was stolen. The only thing out of place were the bodies. It didn't seem like a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't just a random attack. 2 upstate families put up a billboard hoping it will bring answers about the unsolved quadruple homicide. The billboard went up nearly 5 years after their loved ones were found murdered in their Pendleton home. The passage of time with no answers in sight has left the families feeling more hopeless with each passing year.